Wasting no time, straight into it, we're going to break down the full 1 hour interview I did with Viktor Kamenov into a quick little video so you guys can find out how exactly you guys can train like Viktor Kamenov or possibly even better than him. First, let's break down what I like to call his training style archetype. The training style archetype is the form of progression that athlete chooses in order to progress their strength. So for example, some athletes like to use combinations as a form of their progression, so they'll eventually get to longer and longer combinations. Some athletes like to increase their hold times. Some athletes like to increase their power dynamics. Some athletes train many different things such as freestyle and statics and flexibility and mobility work, balance skills as well. So the training style archetype explains how exactly do they like to train, what are they progressively overloading, and what are their goals, what are they focused on. In the interview with Viktor Kamenov, he stated that his training style archetype, in other words, his focus in his training is 3 things. That's statics, power dynamics, and basics. Those are the 3 main things he's focused on progressively overloading, getting better at, and focusing and getting stronger at. So those are his overarching goals, and that's going to affect how he trains, because if he was focusing on combinations because maybe a competition was coming up, maybe he would train slightly differently. So you need to take that into account with your own training. What's your training style archetype? Are you focused on combinations at the moment, or are you focused on individual static skills? So quickly, I want to talk about body composition, because when people get into calisthenics, it's usually because of aesthetics. They want to improve their physique, their body aesthetics by gaining muscle, and that's usually hypertrophy training. But they'll have the long-term goal of learning the planche. So I just wanted to ask Viktor, okay, do you need to be focused on building muscle in order to build that strength, that basis for learning the skills? Because some people think, okay, do I need to be muscular in order to learn the planche? And this was his response.
Yeah, it's important to have some muscles, like all those fundamental things that I said. But it's more important to have general strength, not only your muscles, but in general, that it's something that you build exactly with those preparation exercises.
So when Viktor started calisthenics, and maybe you're starting calisthenics too, he wasn't too fixated on the aesthetics and the muscular part of training. He was focused more on the strength part. He wanted to learn those cool skills he was seeing online. That's the main thing he was focused on, and that's why he was focused on the basics. So, you know, push-ups, pull-ups, dips, pike push-ups, getting to learn the handstand, as well as muscle ups. It was those kind of fundamental calisthenic skills. This provided him with the basis to start learning the skills, and this is also why he still does basics and just progressively overloads it. So now it's still difficult, he can do heavy dips, it's still difficult, and he still makes progress. So as Viktor Kamenov said, it's very important that you build up that foundational level of strength so your body is functional. You can functionally move, do those push-ups, pull-ups, and dips with the correct motor patterns. It's not too important how much muscle you're putting on, although this will help your strength capacity in the future if you do want to focus on that and do want to build strength. But if your focus is the static skills, you don't need to focus on this. It's more important that you build up the foundational levels of strengths and work on your basics. But I have to make it clear, if you watch my other videos on strength principles for calisthenics and you watch my video on the equation to build strength for the planche, you'll know that building muscle goes into that equation. The more muscle you build, the easier it's going to be in terms of your potentiality to learn the planche, so it's not going to hurt if you do want to focus on building muscle as well. We do also know Viktor Kamenov started working on freestyle skills while he was learning some of these basic static skills, you know, learning the front lever, learning the handstand and handstand push-up, but we're not going to focus too much of that in this video because we'll focus more on strength aspects rather than the freestyle skills. So now let's move on to his approach to learning the planche. The Viktor Kamenov approach. Now when you're learning the planche, you need to know what progression should you be working on and should you be training, and when can you move on to the next progression. This is a very common question many people have but don't really know the answer to. He said you should only be working on a variation or a progression if you can hold it for at least 2 seconds at a minimum. And I'm stressing at least a 2 solid seconds, not 1, 2, but a solid 1, 2. Here's his explanation.
Go for a variation that you can hold for at least 2 seconds, because if you can hold it, it means that you can apply control. It's also a mind work. It's not only go for it and hold it, because yeah, maybe you can go for a full planche, but it will be around 0 seconds and you have not enough physically the time to control it. And it's really important, go for progression that will allow you to have the enough physical time to really have that control, have that mind and muscle connection, and after that, you can think about growing those seconds into the current progression once you, of course, get the the requirements, let's say 8 or 9 seconds for progression, then you can go for the next one. Drop again back to 2 seconds and so on. And by this way, you have one healthy progress.
Before you move on to that next progression, make sure you have the form you want in that progression before moving on. So even if you have the solid amount of seconds that you need, which we'll talk about in a minute, you need to make sure that form is where you need it to be. Compare it to other athletes of higher level and see, oh, is that the form I want? Is it at that level yet? And then you want to move on.
Working on not the proper position from the beginning will make you the world champion in not the proper position. Working on the banana from the beginning will make you the world champion into the banana planche. You'll be the best into the banana planche, but you'll never get the real planche. You know, that's the deal.
So just saying, if you guys have been progressing really well, really fast, you've been able to go from advanced tuck to straddle, now working on full planche or whatever it may be, make sure your form is still keeping up with you. Make sure you're not getting weak links. So say maybe your lower back is arching, maybe your legs are bent, maybe your arms are bent as you keep doing the holds, but you're still progressing really well. Make sure you're tackling those weak links, because even though you're progressing fast, other muscle groups may not be getting the attention that they need.
Sometimes it's better to go a few steps back. Maybe not go on a full planche, maybe not even go on a straddle planche. Go shrink yourself even more, but go in the position that you have all your body parts into the right place, and you also have the enough time to control it and to feel it exactly where it should be. Slowly to gain that strength, slowly to increase those seconds, and after that you think about, okay, I extend my body, and so on. Like, this is the logical way of how things should be trained.
This is exactly what I realized, and I had to take my full planche. I was doing full planche presses, all of that, and I had to take it all the way back to a straddle planche. You have to get rid of that ego if you want to increase your form and actually progress the way you should. Now look how much better my form is in the planche. On the flip side of this coin, don't become too much of a perfectionist, as Viktor Kamenov explains here.
But also there is the other side of the coin, which is not to overdo the things. Like, there is some minimum requirements, as I said. Let's say, okay, you get the 3-4 seconds of a good planche, then there is no need to be aiming for those 20 seconds really, in order really to start training the push-ups or the press.
So even to learn variations of the planche, like the planche push-up, planche presses, you don't need crazy like 20 seconds hold. That's a bit of overkill. 8 seconds, around 8 seconds on average is gonna be good. Remember, full planche is the goal, so we don't wanna be getting held up on advanced tuck trying to get 50 seconds. That's not the aim. The aim is full planche, so we need to start working towards it as we're getting better and better and still perfecting our form and working our weak links. But in order to increase those hold times, how do you do this? And this will come down to Viktor Kamenov's exercise selection. The top 3 exercises Viktor Kamenov recommends and that he does to learn the planche is gonna be, first of all, attempts, then it's gonna be any weight exercise that's simulating the planche or maltese presses, things like that. And then lastly, it's gonna be resistance bands, using a resistance band to also simulate the full planche. Don't go crazy doing attempts. I know it's one of Viktor Kamenov's favorites for learning the planche, and it is important, but don't do it every session like I know some of you have been doing. I know some of you have been trying that straddle every session. Don't be doing that. Here's him talking about attempts and how you shouldn't do too many too frequently.
Well, look, that's one of the mistakes I used to make. For example, every time on every training I go for the same attempts and so on, and even going too much with the planches. Let's say 5 times a week, 6 times a week and so on, and every day doing the same thing. And firstly, you get physically tired, and secondly, even more important, is you get mentally tired of doing the same things.
Now let's talk about exercises with weights that simulate the planche, like Zanetti flies. These are great because they're so easy to progressively overload or to track how much you're progressively overloading. And progressively overloading is just making the exercise harder and harder by loading it harder and harder. And that's quite hard to do in calisthenics because we're working with our body weight, so it's really hard sometimes to estimate, okay, how much load am I actually putting on these muscles, etc, etc. It's much easier with weights, which is why it's so great and why it's one of Viktor Kamenov's favorites for learning the planche. You can systematically go through, okay, I'm gonna do 8 kilograms for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever it is, at like 15 reps. Then we're gonna move on to 9 kilograms, then 10. etc, etc. So start training like Viktor Kamenov and start introducing these exercises into your training program. Now lastly, resistance bands. Viktor Kamenov even mentioned he does 50% of his workouts with resistance bands. And for me personally, every workout has at least one exercise where I'm using the resistance bands to learn the planche or to learn the planche form better. That's because you're in the planche position just with a bit of assistance. This is how gymnasts do it. This is what you're doing if you use weights. You're just reducing the load. Same with the planche, you're just reducing the load with the resistance band, but you're learning the full position. It's great for the neurological part of learning the planche, and it's great for the strength part. Top tier exercise in my opinion. I do it every workout. And if you need a set of resistance bands, check out Gore Nation. They've got a whole set of resistance bands. I use these every workout. I use them to warm up with the heavy bands, and then my working sets are with the lighter bands. So you're gonna need some bands like this throughout your planche journey, so check them out in the link in the description below and use the code JACKTHEN for minus 10% off. You guys know. So now you guys know, if you want to be training like Viktor Kamenov, you want to be doing the progressions you can hold for at least 2 seconds, get this up to 8 seconds, move on to the next progression. Don't do too many attempts, but do enough so you can kind of gauge how you're progressing, and sometimes when you're feeling strong, you can push it a little bit. You want to keep in mind the form, remember to watch that, and then you also want to use weights, bands, and attempts all smartly. But what happens when you want to try and increase that 2-second hold to 8 seconds and you hit a plateau? You know, maybe you're stuck at 4 seconds. What do? So the first reason is your form. You're not watching your form too much, you have bad form, so you're not getting the muscle activation you need. So that's number one. Like I said before, watch the form. Number two, you're lacking strength somewhere. You're not working on that weak point. Maybe you have one major weakness in the lower back, the glutes or something, especially in the straddle. I see a lot of people in the straddle that have weak glutes and they're not working on it. They're still working on their shoulders. That's not going to help with that issue if it's the glutes. So make sure you're targeting all the muscle groups that are used in that hold, in that static hold. That includes the legs as well. Lastly, this was a big one for him, and I think it's the main one that he felt was why people plateau, and it's inconsistency. He says that he sees a lot of people that are skipping workouts. Maybe they don't have a workout plan, so they're not really sticking to a routine. The body needs a routine, that it needs that repeated stimulus to keep creating adaptations, and then periodically switch it up so it still gets those adaptations from a new stimulus. You need a training plan to do that effectively. So if you don't have a training plan, you've just been doing home workout and doing whatever you feel, but you've been hitting a plateau, maybe it's time to make a workout plan and change that. Okay, the last section of this video, we're gonna go on to programming. So what kind of things in the programming world does Viktor Kamenov do in terms of his planche progression? You know, how many sets is he doing? What frequency of workouts is he doing a week? All that we're gonna cover now. So firstly, let's talk about sets. How does he decide how many or what number of sets he's gonna do for a specific attempt or planche exercise? And really, he said this depends on whether he's training for competition or not. Because depending on whether he's training for a competition or if it's a regular workout, that really changes his programming and how many sets he's doing. If it's for a competition, he's going to be doing a lot of sets with less rest. This is going to simulate more of combinations, and the sets he's going to be doing at a competition. This is specificity. And if he's doing a regular workout, well, he's going to have longer rests between sets, and he's going to have maybe 3 to 4 sets usually for attempts, he said. So I think it's in that ballpark. But he also said that usually when he's training at the calisthenics park, he'll maybe even do 15 to 20 sets sometimes if he has the time, and he'll just look at his watch and be like, okay, I need to get on with the next thing and then move on to the next exercise. So really it depends, I think he goes off feel a lot. When you're that elite, you can kind of go off feel. So really just make sure it's between 3 to 4 sets, and I'll say over a week, make sure you're getting about 15 to 10 sets in a certain exercise for a certain muscle group. That's generally a good place to be in terms of volume and number of sets. This is very similar to how Thomas Kurganov trains. He says he does about 3 days of hard, heavy training, and then the following days are really light training so he can recover but still work on planche technique. This is called undulating training. If you want to learn that, or if you want a video like this one on the training style for Thomas Kurganov and how he trains for the planche, let me know down in the comments below. Now with that said, let me know in the comments if you want that video on Thomas Kurganov and how he trains for the planche, or if you want that video on undulating training, I can also do this on gymnasts as well, on how they use undulation in their training. Let me know down in the comments. Thank you to all my channel members. Remember, if you become a channel member, you're basically getting personal training, or the closest thing I can provide to personal training. I made this as cheap as possible, and it's way cheaper than actual personal training. Make sure you join the Discord and watch this video, because it's going to explain how Valentin Blanc trains and his training style, because there's no best one training style for calisthenics. There's just many different approaches, and maybe the approach or the training style of Valentin Blanc suits your style better, and maybe it'll help boost your performance even more.